No,
You
looking
ready to
forward
go?
to it. I've listened to a number of your podcasts. You do a great job, and happy to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Doug, it's great to meet you, sir. Thank you for taking a minute out for the program today.
You got it.
So before we get in, I always start with the question about COVID, and I've tried to get away from this question, but I think we're still unraveling all of that we lived through. How did you get through the coronavirus era, and how has it influenced your life and the way that you live today?
But it's interesting because my answer is probably a little bit different. So from 2000, so before 2001, I was director of retail at Bose Corporation. I built out their retail division, and I left there to go out and do speaking and consulting. And so for 16 years, I traveled the world, and that's what I did. And in 2017, I had a client ask me if he had some young kids and asked me to run his law firm and title company. And I'm like, no thanks. I don't want to work for you.
Yeah.
And but he actually made a great offer for me. And so what happened is when the when the pandemic hit, if still been doing what I had done, my business would have went to zero. And instead, when interest rates went down, his business skyrocketed. So I literally had an incredibly successful couple years.
Yeah.
And what it influenced me was for 16 years I coached and consulted on leadership, and then I went back into leadership for about 5 years. And it was great because it was like, oh yeah, this is what I used to, these are the things I used to coach people on. Am I doing what I had been advising? So it was really a great experience. And then when interest rates went back up, it was time for me to leave.
So let's get into exactly what you do on a daily basis. And the way to break that down is to put you in front of kids. It's career day, you're in a school, they're 12 years old, they're eager, and they're like, hey, what do you do for a living? How do you answer them?
I help people change and grow in simple ways. And whether it's in business, whether it's in relationships, uh, you know, I used to focus almost strictly on business, but one of the things I came to see, right, is we carry ourselves. We're the same people, whether it's at home with our kids, in business, out in public, and what have you. The circumstances are a little bit different, but who we are pretty much is the same. And so today, I work with individuals who are really looking. They're either maybe I don't know. I always like to use the word stuck, but maybe they're kind of trying to figure out what's this next level for them, or if someone who is really wanting to go to that next level and help them figure it out.
So my question with you having this level of business acumen and this level of insight, what is it about all of your clients or all of these people that need help? Do you just get lost because adulting is kind of a daunting thing, or being a human on this planet can be such a myriad of things that get us clouded over? What is like one of the silver linings of why we get to this point where we don't know what we're doing anymore?
Interesting. You could almost say sometimes maybe it's a combination of almost too much knowledge, and then also the longer we're doing something, the faster I think we are to react and act in the way that we're used to.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that can really help someone change and grow, and why I wrote the book is when you learn to look at different perspectives and look to see different options, they're there. But our routineness or the stories we've told ourselves, the experiences we have, we're much more faster to react. And the one thing I found in consulting was more often than not, people kind of had the answers. They just hadn't moved forward with it. Maybe they didn't have the confidence. Maybe they didn't think it was right, or at least they had a string of it, but they needed to kind of piece it together in a different way.
So before we leave that kid realm, when you were 12, 13 years old, or in that early teen year, what did you want to be when you grew up? What was your dream job?
Uh, Interesting enough, I ended up going into retail, and I really that's kind of what I wanted to do. And but at 12 and 13, my life was already starting to unravel. And my parents were divorced at an early age, and I had two older brothers, and my mother worked nights. So that was Animal House before there was a such thing known as Animal House. And by 12 and 13, I was already starting to dabble in drugs and alcohol. So I was an early adopter. And So at that point, my life started to kind of unravel, and really started to get my priorities out of whack.
You know, when I was in high school, I worked in a grocery store. It was like the height of retail. It is a fascinating world. The amount of units that can move, the amount of moving pieces. And you do see, and I noticed early on, it's so important to have a good boss. It's so important to have good leadership. And it's kind of like watching a sport, like Tom Brady we were talking about, or a Patrick Mahomes. When they do it well, they make it look easy, but it's difficult. What they're doing is difficult. So my question to you is this: what makes a good leader? What ultimately, at the end of the day, what is one of the key ingredients of having that seamless, like, energy of a leader that can do it the right way?
And with my time at Bose, I saw all sorts of leadership at all different levels. And, I used to always kind of think, right, it was this big strategic thinking and what have you. But, you learn a lot about watching people in their early management. I mean, I always loved coaching people who had moved up from star salesperson to first time manager. And ultimately, if I had to pick one thing, I think that it's somebody who wants to see each person succeed in their own way.
Yeah,
I think a lot of times as leaders, especially young leaders, we want them to be who we think they should be versus what they want to achieve. And that's really one of the advantages of working retail is how do you inspire? How do you motivate? How do you get a part-timer who, is going to school and just working part-time? And it's a stop along the way. It's not their career. But
yeah,
but the customer who walks in, they could be, say, at a retail store, say a specialty store, they could be the top customer of the day. But they don't walk in with a sign that says, "Hey, I'm your top sale."
yeah.
Right? So that part-timer, how do you do that? And I think it's getting that person to want to be better and want to do a good job. And I think that's where great leaders connect with their employees.
So you touched on the tumult that you had to come over as you were getting into your teen years, but take me back further. I mean, a lot of our personality traits are established early on. What was it about your life that gave you this fascination with business and the acumen to become successful and become who you are as somebody that helps people find that success in their lives?
Well, it's so I mentioned my parents were divorced at a very early age, and so I had a lot of confusion because my father was a very successful in business. Was one of the first people who started with when computers came out, and he had a connection with IBM. He worked at Staley's at the time, which is producing of soybeans and corn and such in the Midwest. And then he went to work for a clothing company. So my father, who was successful in building a career, but I saw him each week, but I lived with my mother and we lived in kind of this, I would say, lower middle class, working class neighborhood. And so there was a lot of confusion on my part. Um, but one of the things that I think really changed for me is I actually learned that if you're kind of funny, you can get by in things. I always joke that in high school I would have been maybe voted least likely to succeed, but I was actually voted wittiest of my senior class. And I learned that I could either work hard or I could make you laugh. And but I never would have guessed. And so the interesting thing growing up in this family was that I was kind of told, right, you get a good job at a plant and this is what you do. And I think it's a great career for someone who wants to do that. The problem for me is I didn't really want to do a lot of physical labor, and you know it didn't feel like it challenged me. And one day I'm working in this machine shop, and this guy Frank and uh, Frank goes one day he goes, I've been sitting here on this same bucket having the same lunch for 22 years. I quit that afternoon.
Yeah,
Right? Because I
yeah,
saw, oh, it worked for him, but that's not going to work for me.
yeah. You know, I remember one of my first jobs I ever had. I was at a McDonald's and I was cooking, and there was a guy next to me. I'll always remember his name was Rex, and he got out of the clink, and he was so happy to have a job, and he would just go on and on about how it was the greatest job in the world. And as much as it made me in my young thoughts think, okay, this isn't that bad, there was a bigger part of me that was like, there's no way that I ever want this to be a part of my world for a long time. You know, there's those seminal
Absolutely.
people that will say that one thing to you. I mean, I remember the movie Office Space in the 90s when it came out, with the flare and all that stuff. And I was like, no, 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 no. There was just red flags that went up. So I think there's as much as you have your heroes, you have your anti-heroes.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, for each job, there's a good fit for one person
Sure,
and not a good fit for another, right?
100%.
But I think ultimately, what I found is people who are successful are people who are happy in their work. And if you look at surveys, right, most people are not happy in their work. But I don't think it's actually the work, right? I think it's their mindset in the work that they feel like that they don't have as much control in their happiness and their well-being as they really actually have.
So speaking of the hero, anti-hero, who's been that inspirational force in your life that's allowed you to evolve and migrate to this point and find success and find your happiness?
Yeah, I think I'd say there are two people. One was my father, and who again was very successful in business. But one of the things that he did was, uh, my story goes on to in my late 20s, I end up bankrupting a family business because of drug addiction, and he was my business partner, and I cost him a business. And the way that he was able to forgive me, and then as I grew in business, he became my biggest fan. And so it was such a lesson about again forgiveness and supporting others. And the other person was, I was a college dropout. I really didn't think I would amount to a whole lot because I kind of some of the stories I'd been told growing up. But I worked for a guy at Bose by the name of David Wood, and David gave me so many chances. But most important is, I think what he taught me is that no matter what's going on, I can learn something to be better in the moment. And that's where I really kind of learned to one of the things I think is a lot of us thinks is right is that leadership and success just kind of happens to people. And I think what I really learned from there is it's really what I do on a daily basis that really prepares me for those things. It's not what I think and almost not what I learn as much as what I do. And he taught me that.
So if you could meet one person alive today that's been successful in business, that's done it right, from leadership to exuding this level of some balance and happiness and taking care of employees, just a well-rounded business mind that it's alive in America today or the world, who would you love to spend some time with?
Ooh, that's a great question. That is a great question. I guess that's why it's a famous interview. Yeah. Uh, yeah. There was actually, and I'm going to say it was actually an author over a business person. Um, there was a point at Bose where we were trying to grow the business, and I was having lunch with my boss, and my boss goes, Doug, I just don't think we have the leadership we need to be successful. And I'm like, yeah, I agree. We got to think about what we're going to do. And then I'm driving home that day on the turnpike in Boston, outside Boston. I'm like, holy crap. I think he's talking about me, right? He wasn't talking about the people under me. He was talking
Uh-huh.
about me.
Uh-huh.
And so I went to what you did back then. You went to Barnes and Noble and you went to the leadership
That's
book
it.
section, right? And you look for a cover that grabbed you. And there was a book called The Leadership Challenge by Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner. And why that book was so instrumental is it wasn't their theory of leadership. It's a study of leadership. And they studied all these leaders in nonprofits, in for-profit business, and all these different folks. So it wasn't like, Jack Welch and his theory and all these people. And they that book just gave me so much of a framework to be successful.
Yeah.
And I know that book is still out there today. So I'd probably like to have lunch with either Jim Kouzes or Barry Posner.
So you had mentioned your father being a success in business, and I think about families, about this eternal battle between nature and nurture. Sometimes the apple just falls just right to the ground. Sometimes you really have to be trained to get into it. So my question to you is this: if you could go back in your family lineage and go back to a relative that you never met that may have had an impact on your father, that had an impact on you, that led to your success. Who in your family lineage would you love to have sat down with and picked their brain and figured out how it all happened?
Hmm. Well, what's interesting is that before my father and maybe his brother, there wasn't like a whole lot of success in business. And I would actually go back and meet his father's grandparents, or my great grandparents, I should say. My grandfather was a fire and brimstone preacher in the Midwest, and so hey, there's no more important selling, right? I mean, that's selling right
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
right? But he also sold appliances during the weekday, and he preached on the weekends. Interesting part of the story, though, is that when my parents divorced, they almost kind of disowned my father, and he ended up becoming the black sheep. And what I'd be interested to know is what was it that felt like that you could actually reject someone from the family, that would be okay. Now, also, I think that, that was part of my father's drive, I believe, too,
Yeah.
right? Yep, right. He had been rejected by his family. And my father by no means was perfect. I mean, he had a lot of he liked to go to Vegas. He liked to live fast and but his success, and he had left that clothing store that he ran. Bought a motel, he bought a marina. I mean, he was highly successful, but I think it was driven by what had happened within his family. And I'd be interested as where would that decision made that your maybe I don't want to get controversial, but your interpretation of the Bible became more important than your interpretation of family.
It's interesting because I think that families have a really hard time sometimes operating on unconditional love. We can say all these things, but when it comes down to it, and I almost think in that example that maybe it was better off. Maybe sometimes the family, I know blood's thicker than water, maybe the families we're born into just have too much baggage and history, and you need to just move on.
Yeah, and I've been in recovery a long time, and I see that with a lot of people. I think also, but I think sometimes relationships, the family relationships, and those dynamics, I think get confused because of trying to control things we can control and the things
Yeah.
we can't control.
Yeah.
My friend Steve one time said to me, I don't know, he was talking about something going on with his wife, and he goes, well, he goes, I'm 100% responsible for 50% of every relationship. And that was like,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Right. And so my relationships are always healthy when I'm just owning my half and not trying to be in their half. And what I find and this is a wide painting with a wide brush, but
Sure.
in coaching people, what I've learned is that a lot of men don't carry their half, and a lot of women try to do more than their half.
Yeah.
And if you're out of your half, you're going to end up being disappointed, and it's going to be difficult. So, to me, I think it's about really understanding what's yours and what's not.
So, you have to get into the minds of people and make things better. And there can be a lot of dirt and clutter that go on in people's lives. How do you keep yourself focused and motivated to help change and to protect your soul? What is that gets you up when that alarm clock goes off to do that every day?
Yeah, I think there's probably two things. One is that I know I can't keep the good things that happen in my life if I don't give it away. And so, and then I think the second part is that I like to think that one of the keys to success and happiness is just again this daily growth. But it is important for me to not take on. And part of that, that person, part part of that lesson was learned is when I got into recovery and I started working with other people who were new. And I think the first five people I tried to work with got drunk, right? Never worked for him. And I remember saying to this friend of mine, I was like, gosh, I can't do this. And he just kind of looked at me and goes, what kind of ego do you have that you think you're going to fix these people? Your job is to help these people. And when you do that, it will help yourself. And that was pretty much a big moment that I've carried in recovery. And I've also carried in coaching and just mentoring and helping others.
That's pure wisdom right there. So let me ask you this. If you ran into that troubled teenage version of you in a dream tonight and you had a big book in your hands, big coffee table book, and it was your life you've led so far, and you handed it over and said, this is how it's all turned out so far, would that anywhere in that young version of you believe it?
Oh, no, 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 no way. I mean, at age 28, my life, I just completely bottomed out. People says, well, didn't you see signposts along the way that your life was out of control? And I was like, oh yeah, and I ran those signposts over. Right? I drove those over, and you know, but one of the stories I often think about is when I went to work at Bose, and I got lucky, right? There were some good times where I was right time, right place, right experience in retail, and they were going to build a retail division. And I remember we moved into this corporate office at Bose, and I got my own office. And I just remember sitting there at the table going, wow, at my desk going, wow, who doesn't belong here? Right. I mean, and that was that kid from the past, right?
Yeah,
Just talking to me.
yeah.
And so I would never would have guessed that I would have achieved what I've achieved and I've done what I've done. Uh, and I really do like to say, and I mean this, that if I can do it, anyone can do it. And I think the thing, if I had to say what what was one of the most important points, is that I never have not lived in the past and I've not regretted the past. I wish I could have done some things differently. I've hurt people in my life, right? By my lying and stealing and drinking and drugging and what have you. But one of the things I kept doing was moving forward and being open to change and being open to just knowing that it's what I do on a daily basis that makes my life. It's not as much what happened as what I do today.
Sometimes I'll get into a rabbit hole and there's these little viral clips online that I'll look at. And the other day, Jerry Seinfeld was given a keynote speech, and he's always really good
Mm.
with wisdom. And he said at one point, one of the bottom lines for anybody on this planet is work hard. That's all. Work hard. Whatever you do. If you're cleaning the toilet, if you're throwing a touchdown pass, if you're whatever high or low that you're doing, just work as hard as you can. So my question to you is this: when you look at your career and you look at these successful people around you, what's the one thing, what's the through line that's made their lives not successful in a traditional way, but fulfilling, something that's good?
Yeah, I think it's that they knew that they kept evolving and they knew who they wanted to be. And success, what you see as success, what I see as success, what I see as success, it just, it is different. And I think it's at the end of the day, it's are you pleased with who you've been and what you've done? And I think the biggest thing that I see is that people who do this, that it's compounded over time, right? That each day is a fresh start. Each day, at the end of the day, is an opportunity to be who you said you were going to be and do what you were going to do. And I think that's one big piece. And I'd say the other big piece, if I had to say it, is I think that these people have owned what's happened to them.
Yeah,
Yeah, right. And so I like to always tell my clients that you can't change what you don't own. It's impossible,
yeah.
right? So you can't be a victim of the man or the state or what have you. I mean, there's conditions, that's for sure, right? There's all kinds of conditions that can affect us, but you have to own that moment so that you can change it or choose not to change and just accept it.
So of everything that you've done, evolve to overcome, become? What are you the proudest of?
Hmm. Well, it's probably a little cliche answer, but right? I would say it's my children,
Yeah,
right? That
yeah.
there was a time I wasn't. There was a point, my early 30s. I got a little married a little late, and I didn't really care if I had kids. And I always felt like I'd been okay if I did or didn't. But, I think when we're able to, whether it's break a cycle or break a change, each generation has a different way of parenting. And, I'm proud. I have three daughters who are just terrific young ladies, uh, who are living their own lives. And, you know, they've not, they haven't lived the life I lived. They have lived their own life, and I'm just extremely proud of them.
So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, everyone that knows you, but you're in control of the show. What's your perception of you?
I would say that he's very kind of just tuned into a moment. That I try not to be. I'm not too high. I'm not too low. And and it's one of the reasons that I kind of ended up writing this book is to be able to, I think one of the things that I've always been, that I think people see is that I always have a good perspective and maybe a different perspective than what people have. And that's been something that I've learned over time. And I think that's what people have said. And I believe this book is sharing part of that.
So if anybody wants to reach out, they want more, any of the good business in your world, where's the best place to go?
Well, I'd love for him to actually do start with whatif.com.
Okay.
And the reason to go there is my new book comes out on January 6th, or figure whenever the podcast drops.
Yeah.
But you can download a 44-page excerpt, and that's also right on my website if you want to learn more. But one of the things is when I wrote this book is I wanted to give away the framework. I don't want you to have to buy the book to get the part that I'm teaching. So all the core elements are in the excerpt, and then how to apply it over 52 weeks is the rest of the book.
So last question, you can get into a time machine and go back in time and see one game, one sporting event. Where are you going?
Ooh. It's probably the Celtics. I actually moved to Boston because I wanted to see Larry Bird play. I had no desire to. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Illinois,
Yeah.
and I was a Bears fan and Bulls fan, but I moved here because I wanted to see Larry Bird play.
Yeah.
So I would probably go back and go to see the John Havlicek, Bill Russell day.
I love it.
One of those games.
That's awesome. Great answer. Hey, Doug, thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your story. Have a great holiday season. I appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate you having me.
Yes, thank you.